Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Best Practices and Approaches for Handling Large Data Volumes. I understand that they serve turkey at lunch, so I'll do my best to combat the effects of the tryptophan. First, a little bit about me. My name is Rob Pickerel. I am the Senior Director for Global Technology Services. Global Technology Services, or GTS as we call it internally, is the team of architects, consultants, and developers within our professional services enterprise practice that work with customers to do integration to their back-end systems, leverage our cloud computing technologies like Apex and Visualforce, and also integrate to other applications that are in the cloud. Today we'll be going through and talking about how, when you're working on our platform, you address the issues of large data volumes. When we say large data volumes, we're usually speaking in terms of millions of records. And we'll actually define for you kind of like what is large, when do we start thinking that things are getting large, and we'll present strategies for how to handle that. We have to start with the obligatory safe harbor statement. I believe Mark referred to it this morning as the world-famous safe harbor statement. I've always thought that the company should do Salesforce employees and our Dreamforce attendees a huge benefit just by issuing all Salesforce employees safe harbor T-shirts. Should they actually implement that idea, you are all here, you heard me mention it, I think I should get a cut. So what are our goals for the session today? First thing we want to do is start out by defining what is large. We'll then, as we go through the session today, talk about some of the platform features that we have, native platform features that can help you in addressing these large volumes. We'll talk about key considerations as you're developing solutions that have large data volumes, what you should think of in terms of application design, technology, those sorts of things. We'll look at some of the common patterns that people have used to address large data volumes, and we'll talk about cases where those patterns have been applied. We'll follow up the session with a period of Q&A. They've asked that I remind folks, if you have questions, please come up to the microphones that are in the aisles. All the sessions are being recorded today, so we want to be able to capture your question, capture my answer so that we can get that to folks after the conference. So what is large? First and foremost, a large volume of records tends to be defined by just the number of records or the number of rows that are in the database on a particular object. But there are other things that drive volume as well. So there's the width of the record. As you know, if you have been Salesforce users for a while, we can have up to 500 fields on any standard or custom object. Having 500 fields can drive a whole lot of data. Next item is the shape of the data. So you could have anywhere from like a 2-character abbreviation for a state up to like a 32K large text area field. You can see how having some 32K large text area fields could pretty quickly drive some volume in your instance. So real question, what about me? Are my data volumes large? I am a consultant by trade, so my answer is always kind of, it depends. And what it's really going to depend on is what is your use case. So there are certain cases where having a large volume of records is not a problem for us. There are other cases, particularly those use cases around reporting, where having a large volume of records, I'll say, starts to become interesting, and you need to look at strategies for how you put your data in the org, how you leverage data in the org, to make sure that you address it well. But being a technical discussion, people probably want to know, have some definition for what large is. So I have here some cases that we have from customers with the number of records that we've been able to address. So I have one customer, they're in the consumer space, and in the geography in which they operate, they have pretty much everybody they've ever come in contact with. So they maintain in their instance 150 million contact records. And we'll talk a little bit as we go along, like some of the tools and technologies that they leverage to support that. But they have 150 million. They're in a single object in the instance. Very quickly searchable. When someone comes into one of their retail outlets, they're able to pull them up very quickly and add information to their record. Have another customer, this one in a B2B space that has 14 million case records. Given that the case records are tied off of a contact ID, they're able to pull up the cases and case history for a customer pretty quickly. Another one, have a customer in the telecommunications industry that has 6 million records in their leads, and they are able to divide up those leads, distribute them out to a series of contractors who actually walk from door to door. I didn't know that such things still went on, but for this particular customer, they do. People go by, knock on doors. In all of these cases, all of these are stored natively in the platform. So we'll talk about some instances and approaches where you won't store data natively on the platform. But in all these cases, all stored in the objects within Salesforce. Just want to touch briefly on some of the technologies that we'll talk about today. We'll actually talk about them in the context of the various solutions. But some of the elements for addressing data in the platform would be divisions. We'll talk about what divisions means. Multi-column indexes. This is a relatively new feature for our platform. Batch Apex, which is a mechanism whereby you can manipulate large volumes of data within the platform. And then Scheduled Apex, which is simply a method whereby you can, in advance, schedule the manipulation using Batch Apex. We'll also talk about methods for working with data outside of the platform. So we'll look at how we can use real-time web services callouts to grab data from other systems as you need it. We'll look at the Bulk API for bringing large volumes of data natively into the platform. And we'll look at an oldie but goodie, which is referred to as web links, sort of the first method that Salesforce had for integrating to external systems. Key considerations. As mentioned earlier, generally when addressing large data volumes, it's a matter of the use case. So we'll talk about what are the items of a use case that are relevant when dealing with large data volumes. And we'll talk about the technical considerations. Is your organization ready to handle the integration that's necessary to address large data volumes outside of the platform? So the use cases comes down to when and where and how much of the data is needed. It used to be the case in Salesforce that we always wanted to bring the data into the platform. We didn't have a lot of the mechanisms that have come out in the last 4 or 5 releases, which now allow you to reach into your external systems, pull that data into Salesforce in real time. So we always used to bring it in. Generally, the approach now with Salesforce is to keep that data in the systems where it resides. Replicating data, moving data back and forth can be a sometimes expensive, always fun proposition. So what we try to do is leverage that data in the systems where it resides so that you don't have to replicate it into the platform. Technical considerations. So related to bringing data into the platform, there are really three areas where you are required to bring the data into Salesforce. That's if you want to leverage it in workflow. So if you want to, based upon a record changing, you want to trigger an event, have some other process fire, send an email, you name it, you want to have that data in the platform because our workflow engine needs to have visibility to that data. Same applies to triggers. So if you wanted to do an Apex trigger to perform calculations on a set of data, you need to bring that data into the platform so that it's native and can perform those calculations. And the third, which is probably the heaviest use case where data is required in the platform, is for reporting. So anytime you want to generate a report off of something, you need that data resident in the platform. next technical consideration is your organization web services ready? So what we've found with most of the customers that we work with nowadays is that they have implemented some sort of EAI strategy. So they're leveraging some sort of enterprise service bus. So we have lots of customers who are on Oracle Fusion, a lot of customers who are on BizTalk, TIBCO, WebMethods, you name it. What we look to do from a consulting perspective is leverage the tools and talent that you have in those enterprise service buses to help you enable integrations that support large data volumes. And then the last consideration is sufficient bandwidth. So even if you have that enterprise service bus internal to your organization for your integration needs, you may not have what you need exposed on the internet from a capacity standpoint. So we want to look at, particularly if we're going to be making lots of real-time calls, do you have sufficient bandwidth there for us to interact with the service? So these are some sample solutions that we'll look at today. Salesforce sort of started in the business-to-business arena, so we'll look at what some customers have done in terms of addressing cases, large volumes of cases and orders. We also saw with some of the announcements that we have this week that Salesforce is moving closer and closer to that business consumer space, both with stuff in the Service Cloud as well as the announcements around Chatter. So we'll look at a pattern for addressing large volume of accounts or person accounts. Cases. So have a customer who has significant rapid growth in cases. Believe they were up around 16 million cases. And as part of their as part of the way they use the application, they needed to have case history available, basically for the full lifetime of the customer. They did not yet have any sort of enterprise service bus or externally facing web services available, so we needed to look at options for how to keep those cases internal to the platform, yet still have it be performant for them. Our solution for handling this was to leverage Batch Apex. So Batch Apex, pretty recent addition to our platform, allows you to manipulate large volumes of data inside of the platform. With non-batch Apex, there are limits around how many records you can move at a particular amount of time, how much data you can pull back in a query. By leveraging an asynchronous approach for Batch Apex, you can schedule items out, request that they be processed as resources are available on the system, and therefore we allow you to process, because you're giving us the benefit of doing it when we can fit it in, we give you the benefit of processing a much larger number of records. And what we used Batch Apex for was to take the case data that they had and tier it into multiple objects. So we leveraged a standard case object to allow the users to see the most recent cases or those cases that were active. These are the ones that they still needed to work on, cases still open, what have you. In the second tier, we pushed in all of the cases. So we would take those cases that were current, push them to a custom object, and that would include all of the old cases, case history, so that you would have a single object, full object that you could do reporting against that case. Second tier on this one, though we didn't do it with this customer, you do have the option to move that off the platform. So we have seen where customers have taken that data, moved it to a web application server on their side, for example, exposed it as a service, and handled it that way. Reason to do that would be if you didn't, say, want to pay like additional storage costs for Salesforce, go ahead and move it off the platform. And while in this case we only leveraged 2 tiers, if you had additional tiers, you could create those as well. So you could have new active cases, old cases, last year's cases, 5 years ago's cases. Leverage the tiering approach to push data into multiple objects, leveraging Batch Apex. So what were the results of this approach? When all the cases existed in one tier, doing a search against those cases took between 3 and 5 seconds to return the results. After moving data out into the second tier so that only the most recent cases were in the first tier, we got sub-second response on the search. Before we implemented the solution, some of the reports were long-running. Some of them were so long-running that they would go to 3 minutes and actually time out. However, after implementing the solution, all of the reports that we needed to run, at least against the first tier, had sub-minute response times.
The report timeout you just mentioned?
Yeah.
How long is that?
By default, it's 3 minutes. Yes. So through support, you can request longer timeouts. They can extend that for you. Another solution, we didn't employ it in this case because it wasn't available. We actually used an external heartbeat from another web application server. But this solution could now be updated to employ scheduled Apex so that on a regular basis, we reach out, touch the instance to tell Apex to move things to the next tier. Next is the case of orders. So we had a customer that had, it wasn't so much that they had a large volume of orders, it's that they had a whole lot of line items on each of their orders. And the orders were actually not processed in Salesforce. They were actually processed in a back-end order management system. So it presented a rather large replication and syncing challenge to bring those orders forward into Salesforce when really based upon the use case, the end users didn't need all that data. One of the things we try to do in Salesforce is just put the most relevant data, again, things that would be needed for workflow, triggers, or reports, put that data in Salesforce, and then keep the other data residing in the back-end systems. So for this solution, what we did is we presented essentially an order summary record. So it gave the details that were needed for, keeping track of your business, where do I sit relative to my quota, data needed to do forecasting, but kept all of the individual line item details within the back-end system. Sure, question? Okay. So what we did is we produced a service one in batch to move the detailed summary records into Salesforce, had an ID that referenced the ID in the back-end order management system, and as people needed details, they would click and we would use a Visualforce page to reach out via force.com call out to present the details for the individual line items. So in this case, if you look at data layer integration, that's where we handled the summary level integration, bring the summary into Salesforce. And then at the application logic level, as they clicked for the details, made a force.com call out to grab those records. Another option that we have from a integration standpoint is to do user interface level integrations. User interface level integrations can either be in the format of web services callouts, where we call a web service to pull in details like line item details on an order, or in the format of what we refer to as web links. So if you have an existing web infrastructure for orders, you could, which many of our customers actually have from SAP, Oracle Financials, what have you, they can leverage a web link where you simply take the account ID or the order ID, produce a formatted URL, and call that existing infrastructure. That can either be displayed inline in Salesforce as an iframe, or that can be popped out as a new window over top of Salesforce, depending upon what user experience you would like. So again, orders, put the order summary information in Salesforce, leverage an external ID to link to it. Back-end ERP system, maintain the line item details. And as we pulled up the items, not only could we get the line item details for the orders, we could also get details from related objects, such as contracts. So what were the results? Had 12 million line items stored in Salesforce before we implemented this solution. After implementing the solution, none of them were stored in Salesforce. We implemented a vast amount of hairy, ugly daily replication calls to keep those in sync. So rather than having to integrate for 500 to 100,000 line item details each day, we were just doing 1,000 to 2,000 order summaries each day. Not implemented as part of this solution, but certainly something that could have been leveraged is a new technology that's just gone GA in our most recent release, and that is the Bulk API. Bulk API, now integrated into our Apex data loader, allows you to push large CSV files or XML files into our platform. It's our first RESTful-based web services API. Everything else prior to this has been SOAP-based. You can push in a large file. It then parallelizes the job inside of our platform, splits it up, and then loads the records very quickly into Salesforce. With this solution, we have seen an order of magnitude increase at the rate in which you can load records into the platform. Last solution that we'll take a look at is addressing large number of accounts or person accounts. So in this case, we had a customer that they were dealing with basically people nationwide and lots of similarity between customer names. So they would go and they would do, even if somebody was in Virginia and they were looking for somebody in Arizona, they'd do a search and they'd get back, several hundred John Smiths, and it made it very hard while they had people on the phone to actually locate the person that they were looking for. It was taking in the order of several minutes, not to run the searches themselves, but to actually find the person, because they would have to keep adding additional search criteria to narrow down their search. Fortunately, the customer's organization was such that they worked in multiple geographies. Because they had geographies, they were able to leverage a feature of our platform, which is known as divisions. Divisions, I actually think, is kind of a misnomer for the product. It was initially created to support one of our larger customers that did have multiple divisions. But rather than looking at division as a division of a company, a different line of business, it should actually be looked at as a division of data. So there are any number of ways that you could segment data. In this case, we happen to segment it by geography. And the advantage of divisions is that when you implement divisions in Salesforce, it automatically reduces the selectivity of a query for a particular user. So users fall into a default division. You turn that feature on. It automatically limits to that division. Doesn't mean that you can't search across all divisions. You do have the ability to continue to do that. You just specify it in your list viewer report. One key thing to note about divisions, don't everybody run out and turn on divisions if you have a lot of data. It's a one-way feature. So once you turn it on, you can't turn it off. So what do we do for this customer? We implemented divisions based upon geography. When we implemented those divisions based upon geography, they would specify in their list of views what their default division was. And then we created reports for them that worked at different levels. So there were people who just needed to see what was taking place within their individual geography, where there were other people who needed to see what was taking place across the whole business. So we created reports to leverage those divisions to give them the appropriate visibility. So before, depending upon you were searching on, again, John Smith was probably one of the worst cases. You would get double and triple digit results on people that you were searching for. By implementing divisions, increasing the selectivity, limiting it to just people within a particular geography, they got it down to less than 10 results per search. This helped them to increase agent effectiveness because they only had to do a single search to locate the people within their geography, helped them to identify the customers faster, and close out their calls more quickly. One feature that wasn't available at that time, but could also have been implemented to assist in this particular case, is multi-column indexes. So multi-column indexes essentially restrict the amount of data that you use to generate the index that drives the report or that drives the search. And leveraging this new feature, we have seen 2 to 10 times increase in performance for search results. And now I was going to open it up for questions. I am in the consulting organization. I do this stuff all the time, and want to see what questions people had for dealing with large data volumes. Back here. Would you mind going to the mic in the aisle so we capture the question?
Can you dive a little deeper into multi-column indexes, how that would impact the data set and schema and what it does for queries?
So it speeds up the query so rather than indexing like the full 500 fields, so rather than indexing the one on the left that is wider, it specifies based upon what we see your usage being on those tables. It specifies which are the fields that need to get indexed. And therefore, because it's dealing with a smaller set of data, the index is smaller and the search response is faster. So, and it's a feature that, it's kind of an interesting feature. Like, you can request that it be enabled, but one of the things our ops team will do is they will look for long-running queries across all of our customer orgs to identify tables that can benefit from this feature. So sometimes, without you even knowing it, it just gets turned on in the background and works for you. Question here.
What are some of
Could I ask you to go to the mic? Thank you.
What would be some of your recommendations for handling reference data?
So you mean like IDs to records
Client
in external
information that are used across multiple orgs,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
So in Salesforce, client IDs across multiple orgs?
No, you have clients in your backend systems, right, that are
Gotcha.
used across multiple orgs in Salesforce.
So are you familiar with external IDs at all?
No.
So one of the features of our application, and it's on every object, standard, custom, what have you, are external IDs. So you can have, I think the default is 3 external IDs per object. So when you create a field, identify it as an external ID, the external ID, one thing, it automatically gets indexed. But another very valuable feature of it is that you can update or upsert data from those external systems to Salesforce leveraging that external ID. Before we had external IDs available, what you needed to do was query the object in Salesforce, find out what its Salesforce ID was, and then request to update, insert, what have you, based upon the Salesforce ID. Leveraging the external ID, you can say, I want to update this account record in Salesforce based upon this ID from the ERP system, or based upon this ID from the order management system. Can you go to the mic for us? Thanks. Does that answer your question?
As a follow-up to that question,
Yeah.
Is the external ID also applicable for update? You say it works for upsert. Does it work for update?
Yes. Yeah.
Going back to your use case that you had with the web service call out, do you have stats? I know you said it was an infrequently used service. Do you have stats as to how often it got called after you did the changeover? So how often the external data was accessed? And what kind of latency did you encounter when you needed to call out to, how long did it take to paint that page?
I don't have the
Was that
stats on,
factor?
on how often it was called. So we actually, it was implemented such that you had to click a button to call it. Reason being is that the people didn't need it, right?
Right.
So rather than, because it is absolutely possible using Visualforce to implement a page that would make a call out based upon the page being opened.
Right.
But
in this case, you
again, why?
definitely
Yeah.
didn't want to do that.
Why go and grab data? It was sub-second response,
Okay, great.
and it's, if you want, we can have.
I was just curious.
Yeah, we can have whatever discussion that you'd like in terms of like how you implement that and what you need in terms of externally facing infrastructure to make that happen.
Okay, thanks.
When you implement the multi-column indexes, do you tell Salesforce which column should be indexed, or do they kind of look at it and determine it themselves?
They figure it out.
Okay, and then also, because I'm pretty sure we've had that done before, and then over time it just kind of went away.
So you may have had custom indexes done, which are actually different than multi-column indexes.
Okay, and then when you do an external ID, does that force one of these indexes, or would that be?
It's
separate?
not the multi-column index, but when you do an external ID, it automatically gets identified to be indexed. Question?
Yeah, I had a question on normalizing your data within Salesforce, because Salesforce really counts the space by record versus the actual space. So that suggests that you would denormalize your information and stuff it all into one object versus creating custom objects and spreading it out. Can you just comment on that best practices?
I mean, so Salesforce relative to a lot of the systems that we integrate with, so whether it's, like Oracle TCA or, Siebel UCM, the various models that are out there, Salesforce tends to be much flatter anyway. So like if you look at, I think Oracle TCA, it's like 12 to 16 tables that represent an account, whereas in Salesforce, there's a single object. So we generally find that stuff gets flattened anyway as you move it to the platform. I'm not sure I answered your question, but does that make sense?
Well, or just in terms of, let's say, best practices that you would suggest to clients. A client, your example about customer data,
Right.
Somebody might normally create a custom object to put, let's say, the address information, another custom object to put phone numbers in, and use the contact for the other stuff.
Right.
But then you've got 3 times the space in Salesforce, since that's how they count the space. So, what do you generally recommend in terms of things?
Keep
how
it
to
flat.
handle that?
Keep it flat, not just for storage purposes, but also for performance purposes. Other questions? Question here.
Division feature that was mentioned by you, is it available in the hierarchy or it's just one level of divisions?
Is it available in what?
Think of it like in the case of United States, right? East, Midwest, or West, whatever.
Right.
And then next level of hierarchy at the state level. Does it allow that kind of?
Oh, gotcha. No, there aren't multiple levels to divisions. So that's one of the things we typically do is determine what is the right level to set divisions. So do you set divisions regionally, or do you set divisions based upon state? Do you set divisions based upon county, or do you set divisions based upon zip code? Because you don't want to get it too fractured, because then you end up with a very small set of data in there, right? But you also don't want it too wide, because then you don't get the benefits of better performance on reports, searching, that sort of thing.
On the bulk APIs, does it also support bulk exporting of the information? And the nature of my question is around getting that, kind of transactional information out of there to put into a data warehouse. Like my users, they want to throw everything in here because they have the great reporting capability. But
Right.
It's not time-based reporting. And, they love the ability that they can just drag and drop their fields very easily versus hopping into the legacy ERP systems and things like that. So it's how do you handle that?
I'll give you my card, and I'll get you an answer, because I'm not sure on the pulling out. But we'll get you an answer. Yeah.
Question on divisions. Would you recommend implementing that when there's not a large volume of data, but really just for usability purposes, when it's not that people shouldn't have access to the data, but they just don't want to see it because it annoys them?
I would leverage roles and profiles to do that.
You would go with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because when you implement divisions, you change the way reporting works, and then people who are at higher levels in the organization actually have to select if they want to report across all divisions. I think you would have usability impacts that you don't want if you're not currently having an issue around volume of data. Other questions?
I've been trying to find this information for months. Does this exist anywhere in the developer forum, or?
I don't know that it does. I know that product management has produced a deck around some of these best practices. I don't know if it's been put out in the developer forum, but I'll get you a card as well, and we'll find out where it is for you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Anybody having issues with large data volumes currently? Back here. You have a question? Here he comes. Oh, you go ahead. You're at a mic.
Going back to divisions, now is the profiles tied to divisions in the sense that if you want to filter by a certain geographic area and the division is split by it, is it set by the profile?
Division is tied to a user, so you specify a default division for a user. So when you enable divisions, default division appears on the user object.
Thank you.
I'm just looking for advice. We do
I give advice. So
we do several ETL transfers every night.
Okay. Informatica, cast iron?
Informatica.
Okay.
And if an insert or an upsert fails, Salesforce will tell us what we get a load of. I'd like a redundant process that would assure me that when it didn't end up in a load error, that it actually ended up where I feel it should have ended up with millions of rows and instantaneously, kind of like a hash totaling or something like that.
Okay. So, actually, if you come back to the mic, because I think I want to ask clarifying questions. Informatica, the logs aren't telling you what it is you want to know on the...
Informatica will only tell us, it will tell us when a load error happened and why, and that's based on a return message from Salesforce, I'm told.
Yep.
Other than that, the assumption is everything's okay.
Okay, and then the process that you're looking...
I want to make sure that what I'm being told, I want a redundancy. I want a second way to check that, the 750,000 rows really are where they're supposed to be.
Gotcha. So you want to verify that when Informatica tells you that it went in and there wasn't an error, and it is in Salesforce, you want to verify.
Suppose I'm moving 750,000 rows and I got 3 load errors. Well, that means that, 750,000 minus 3 should be where it's supposed to be. And I want a redundant process to verify that that really is what happened.
So a couple of options there. You could probably use Batch Apex. So you could load to an intermediary object. So rather than loading directly where you want to go, load to an intermediary object, and then use Batch Apex to move 749,977 in. And yeah, I think you could work out doing a count for how many.
I understand what you're saying. I don't understand why you're recommending that. What is the value of that, of the intermediary?
You want to count for how many actually got loaded to verify that Informatica.
Well, no, I want more than a count. I do. The count's good, but I also want to know that if it was supposed to end up in North Dakota, that it actually ended up in North Dakota and not South Dakota. That the data actually ended up on the record in the object where it was supposed to be.
Okay, I'll have to think about this one more.
Okay.
But I'll get you a card at the end. I got 3 cards I got to give out. 4. Another question.
Yeah, this might be a little bit, it's probably a little specific question, but on Batch Apex, I heard there's like a 10 call-out limit today. And let's say I'm processing about 100,000 opportunity records.
Yeah.
And I want to send out an email for each of the 100,000 records that were processed. Would that come under the call-out limit, or email messages are not within a call-out limit?
Email messages have a separate limit.
Okay. Do you know what that limit is, by any chance?
I don't. but I'll get it for you.
So that'll be the 5th card.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. I got a whole box, so I'm good.
Is it possible to achieve real-time data replication to an ODS which is within the enterprise? If so, how do you go about doing that?
Doing real-time data replication?
Yes.
So you want to push data out of Salesforce in real time into an ODS?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. The most straightforward way to do it would be outbound messaging. So there's a feature in Salesforce called outbound messaging that as a record appears or is updated, you can push that out to a web services endpoint. You can either push the whole record or you could even just push the ID and the session ID and then call back for the details.
Okay.
You could also leverage Apex triggers.
Okay.
So that as data appears in an object, you could do a call out based upon that to update the ODS.
Okay. What is the typical SLA when you try using either of those methods?
I'm not sure what the SLA is, but its response is generally pretty fast. Outbound messaging, one of the benefits of it is it's native. It's built in the workflow.
Okay.
So you can do it. You have to develop the endpoint yourself, but you pretty much just configure it in the app, specify the endpoint, specify the payload, and you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Pretend I'm a new company. I don't have any data storage right now, and I want to use the cloud. You basically recommended that if you have a lot of data and it's not for triggers or things, that you should store it externally. So I'm not in the cloud now. I'm using something else. I'm using SQL or something like that. Other than the fact that storage is somewhat expensive and limited in Salesforce, are you essentially saying that you wouldn't use Salesforce as a substitute data storage mechanism? You would still say that you should use another tool to store your data?
I would say don't store it in Salesforce unless your use case calls for you having it in Salesforce. So the old model used to be everybody would sort of replicate everything into Salesforce. Truth is you don't, let's take the orders case. You don't need to have, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, you don't need the line item detail in Salesforce. Like people will call in, like relative to orders, they may call in and like, where's my stuff? Is probably one of the most frequent questions, right? So I want to have order status. So I want to know, is it shipped? Is it in the warehouse? Did the order get split? What happened? But I don't need to have the line item detail that says that I have, 7 of these and 4 of those and 12 of those.
So you're essentially saying that Salesforce should be used as an application and not as a storage mechanism. This seems to be essentially what you're saying when you're talking about large storage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim Lukens, do you have a question?
Hey, Rob, thanks. Jim Lukens. In the spirit of community to maybe help with some best practices from our experiences as a customer, when we do large data volumes, our best practices is really to also kind of include some utilities areas, utilities objects, one of which is really centralized integration and batch error processing, as well as centralized integration and batch logic processing as custom objects. We also do a transaction log, so we kind of do some value assessments of our data and some of its priorities, and then we have the basis there for evaluation of those results within the application itself so that we can start doing support process and support layer applications against those based upon your results. It does mean extra work from a perspective of developing those kind of routines and the results.
So you put logging, monitoring results in objects in the app.
Yeah, and we also record transactions. So, we would classify the 700,000 transactions according to certain what they were. We give them values, and then we're able to interact upon, what they were. And that feeds the support mechanism, which is then looking at perhaps, hopefully, dashboards and reports, and they can assess what's going on if certain records are missing and know where to escalate it based on the tiering of the support.
Thanks. Sure. Yeah, that is a common approach for us, is to create monitoring objects in Salesforce and either have the external integration or have the Apex code right into that object. And then you can use standard workflow, for example, to send you notifications based upon changes to that object.
If I may go back to the web links question in regarding getting detail items, what is the limit for an enterprise edition? What are the latest limits? I don't know if you know at the top of your head.
So web links, there shouldn't be any limits because you're not actually, the work is not being performed in Salesforce.
I see.
So in a web link, you're simply building a formatted URL, and then based upon that formatted URL, you're calling an external system.
Thank
Are you asking about call-outs?
No, basically just a link to go to an external system.
Yeah, there's no limits to that.
I see. Call-out, how would the call-out be different in that web services has to do some
Correct.
work within Salesforce?
Correct. A call-out, again, it's HTTP or HTTPS, but in a call-out, you're actually calling from the back-end platform, whereas in a web link, the call is being made from the browser.
Thank you.
All right. If you have any other questions? If I owe you a card, please come see me. Thank you. Oh, before you run, everybody remember to fill out your online survey, win your iPod Nano.